We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in today for Kirby Anderson, and we have got a great program for you today. We're going to start out the program talking about martial arts and Christianity with Dr. Keith D. Yates. In the second hour, we're going to change directions and go to Dr. Robert Popovian with Pfizer to talk about their new vaccine they've got coming out, but also to talk about prescription drugs in general, an importation scheme that Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida is proposing, and other issues around prescription drugs. And then in the bottom of the hour, in our next hour, we're going to turn to Wisconsin Senator Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who has authored with Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa a proposal, a study on Hunter Biden and Burisma. They released this in September. It's not getting a lot of attention, but it should. So we're going to turn right now to Dr. Keith Yates. He's in studio with me. Dr. Yates, thank you for joining us.
It's a privilege to be here.
And let me give our listeners just a little bit of background. Now, you and I have known each other for a long time. You started martial arts training in 1965 and became one of the youngest black belts in the country when you turned 17. He's one of the top kata champions in the country back when you were competing regularly. You hold a 10th degree, or what we call 10th Dan in American Taekwondo. You also founded in 1976 the American Karate and Taekwondo organization, which is still around. You graduated in 1971 from SMU with a degree in graphic design, and then you went on and earned a master's degree from Dallas Theological Seminary, and then a PhD from another university, let's see, Great Plains Baptist Divinity School. But you were at DTS, Dallas Theological Seminary, for, I guess, most of your career, 45 years?
Well, 40 years, yeah. I retired a couple of years ago.
You retired a couple of years ago, and you were in the art department, but you also taught there, I believe.
I taught, as a matter of fact, there's a degree program in media arts and worship, and so I taught visual communications in that. 40
years at one place.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, but it was a privilege to serve the Lord there at DTS.
So you spent, going back to the time, 1965, you were a kid and you started in martial arts. There were not many martial arts schools around at the time here in Texas.
As a matter of fact, there was only one in Dallas. My instructor, Alan Steen, opened the very first karate school, dojo we call it, in Dallas in 1962.
And you started in 1965, and of course that was Texas Karate Institute.
Right.
And that was over in the Hillcrest area, if I remember right.
It was, right across from SMU.
And so I started in 1968 at Texas Karate Institute in Garland. So that was where, that was close to Mesquite where I lived. And I don't recall us running in, but I was only there for a year or so. And then I got back into, I was in football, and that started up, and didn't get back into it until college. So, and that was at Texas Karate Institute in Arlington then.
Right.
And we eventually got a black belt. And you and I sort of operate underneath your oversight, because you are in some ways sort of, for lack of a better term, kind of the head of karate, taekwondo in the North Texas region.
Right.
And a number of organizations around the country are part of the American Karate and Taekwondo organization. But there's also the Gospel Martial Arts Union, which is a martial arts thing which stresses the Christian role. Talk us a little bit about that.
Well, a number of years ago, I've written a number of books, and one of my books, although it wasn't specifically a Christian book, I did talk about my faith and some of the martial arts philosophy. And so I got this call. This was the days before the internet and all that, from a pastor who had started the Gospel Martial Arts Union. And he said, hey, I'm reading one of your books. It sounds like you're a Christian. I said, well, I am. And so he said, we've got this organization of Christian martial artists. We'd love to have you involved. So I started getting involved in that back in the 80s, I guess the late 80s.
And you're chairman of the board now, aren't you?
Now I'm chairman of the board because he retired and they were looking for somebody else to take over. And because I had a seminary degree as well as an advanced belt in the martial arts, they wanted to know if I would be interested. So I prayed about it, and I've been on the board and the chairman of the board for several years now.
The role of Christianity and martial arts, and I'm going to show listeners your book here. This is Martial Arts and Christianity, Be Ready to Make a Defense. And so this was your book that you wrote. And it's a small book, but it tends to try to address a number of issues that come up between Christians and martial arts. Can Christians really be engaged in martial arts? Because most of it comes from Eastern thinking. It's
right.
The idea is, and so isn't there a lot of Eastern philosophy in that, and doesn't that affect people? So let's start out. Give us a little bit of the history of the martial arts.
Well, the oldest martial arts come from India and China. And so they were intertwined. You've seen the stories about Shaolin monks in the Buddhist temples.
And
so
the Kung Fu television show.
Exactly. And so it spread from China to Japan and Korea and some of the other Asian countries. And then finally came to the United States after World War II, when a lot of servicemen returned from the Far East. And I have to say, in spite of the fact that you see all this mysticism in television shows and movies.
And you saw that in the Kung Fu show.
Correct. The average American karate taekwondo school has very little Asian philosophy. And I often tell people that are concerned about philosophy and the martial arts that the most American instructors couldn't even intelligently discuss Zen Buddhism, let alone teach it.
When I started Texas Karate Institute in 1968, the only real philosophy there was win your tournament.
Correct, yeah.
There was nothing in there of spiritual or anything else. We had a lot of young men, I think mostly in their 20s or early 30s, that were sort of leading these schools. But it was there was really no religious aspect to it at all. So I would have been surprised if people had said that at the time. But it certainly does go along with it traditionally in some areas.
Well, you see in some schools where they have bowing and meditation, and people get the mistaken idea that that's, again, Zen Buddhism, whereas I think it's just cultural trappings. Still today in Korea or in China or Japan, people will bow as a greeting instead of shake hands. So it's more of a cultural thing rather than a religious thing, in my point of view.
My guest for this hour, Dr. Keith Yates, and we're talking about martial arts and Christianity, and this is a copy of his book there. We have more information about Dr. Yates on the website at pointofview.net, so if you want to find out more about him, you should go there. I think we have a link to the book here on there, and has both your bio and how you got involved in this. And you've been sort of a light to an awful lot of Christians and students in general. You have a board that you keep all the black belts that are sort of under you that you try. When we come back, we want to talk a little bit about that and the expanse there. But you've also been involved with Chuck Norris and Kickstart and a number of other organizations that have played a major role in both expanding martial arts to average individuals, but also to low-income groups where they can learn and begin to take that. So we're talking about martial arts and Christianity for this hour. So stay with us. We'll be back with Dr. Keith Yates in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The mainstream media nearly always think alike, and the best example of that came 2 weeks ago when Glenn Greenwald resigned from The Intercept. Now, I'm sure you probably haven't heard about this news outlet, so let me explain why this provides such a good example of media groupthink. Glenn Greenwald was one of the founders of The Intercept. He created it because he wanted to have a news outlet that was insulated from partisan pressures and corporate influence. He is probably best known for his criticism of the surveillance state established by President George W. Bush after 9/11. He was convinced that corporate power kept him and others from reporting important stories. That is why he created The Intercept, so that he would be free from corporate pressure. So why did he resign from the news outlet that he actually created? His fellow editors would not let him publish a column about the documented evidence of corruption with the Biden family. In essence, they were following suit with all the news media and social media that ignored the story or even blocked the dissemination of the story. Columnist Jack Crow concluded that the Intercept editors succumbed to groupthink and quickly fell into lockstep on the Biden corruption story because their bias and partisanship comes from what pervades so much of the media class, cultural affinity. What keeps these elitist journalists in line is rarely corporate influence. They all have the same worldview and the same perspective on politics. They concluded that the original story of Hunter Biden and the Biden family published in the New York Post had to be ignored because it might hurt the Biden campaign. That is why social media censored it. That is why the news media ignored it or labeled it as Russian disinformation. Sadly, even the editors of The Intercept gave in to groupthink. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and we're talking Christianity and martial arts with Dr. Keith Yates, who has, I guess, a 55-year career in martial arts, and 40 years at Dallas Theological Seminary, where you retired just a few years ago. So talk to us a little bit about the different styles, because there's Chinese, there's Japanese, Okinawan, Korean, and then even some other styles out there.
Well, probably the best way to divide martial arts is through the physical aspects, the techniques, rather than the historical beginnings. One of the ways to divide martial arts is between hard and soft styles. Mm-hmm. Hard styles would be like karate and taekwondo, where they're kicking and punching you. Softer styles might be something like aikido or tai chi, where they do softer type motions. More to our discussion today, you could divide them between internal and external styles. An external style would be mainly focused on the physical aspects, self-defense, again, kicking and punching. Internal styles would be more focused on meditation. There aren't a whole lot of internal styles that are popular in the United States or even in Western countries. But again, going back to our discussion of Christians being cautious about involvement with the martial arts, I would say talk to the instructor and see whether he's got an external or an internal approach. Do they do a lot of meditation, trying to become almost like Star Wars, become one with the force of the universe, mm-hmm. which kind of gets into the whole religion thing that we were talking about earlier.
So my sense is that the way I've described it, the Chinese styles tends to be softer, I think, and that's what we typically call kung fu. Mm-hmm. There's maybe a range of that, but I mean, typically we sort of think the Chinese is kung fu. The Japanese and Okinawan schools, we typically just call karate. Right. And that's a harder version, I think, in most of them. Is that a fair assessment?
It is, and there are some hard style kung fu and some softer style karate, but that's a pretty good generalization as well. Taekwondo obviously is a hard style,
which is a Korean style.
Right.
And what typifies Taekwondo more so than the others, the Korean styles really like kicking, yes. and they really like head high kicks.
Right.
The Japanese, I would argue, sort of like hands and feet roughly equally.
Exactly.
The Chinese, a little more hand oriented. I think I went to a kung fu school one time, and they said, we stress the hands, but that's because you're good with the hands. You're more dexterous with your hands, and so it's easier to learn quickly. When I went over to the Korean style to talk to them, they said, well, the legs are longer, they're stronger, they're more powerful, but they're also harder for most Americans to be able to use, and so you have to train more to do that. But once you do that, you become a much better martial artist because you've got that length and power of the legs.
Exactly. And also has to do with your own physical capabilities. I would say not only your flexibility, but even your age. Mm-hmm. When you and I started, most of the people involved in the martial arts were young people. Nowadays, there's an awful lot of kids, but a lot of older people want to come in to learn a little self-defense and physical fitness, too. And they're not going to be able to do something that a 16-year-old can do. So I've actually modified my own approach over the last few decades to do probably a little bit more hand techniques, a little bit more practical stuff rather than jumping up in the air like you're going to kick a board off of someone's head.
And my sense was back in the 70s when the tournaments really, we had tournaments all along, but the full contact started coming in and other things. But if you were going to win a tournament, you almost had to have some Korean skills in there just because the head high kicks were so easy to see. It kept you a little further distance away from the person, and that became sort of a defining figure, a defining trait of if you're going to win a tournament, you almost need to be able to sort of adopt some Korean kicking techniques.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of the American stylists did. They took the Korean kicking and some of the Japanese hand styles, and before they outlawed throws in competition, some people would even do judo throws where you throw somebody over your shoulder and then kick them or punch them when they're down on the ground. Those were the days that there were not only a lot of eclectic combinations of styles, but there were fewer rules, too. Now that we've got a lot of kids, there are a whole lot more rules in competition and even in the dojo, which is why it's much safer for kids nowadays than it used to be.
Which is a good point, because when I joined back in '68, and you had already been there for a while, I think you got your black belt about that time.
Right.
They at the Texas Karate Institute, they called it Texas Blood and Guts Karate.
Blood and Guts Karate.
Blood and Guts Karate, because it was a tough system. The classes, if I remember right, were 2 hours long. They were tough. You had to, and the classes were small, I think, in large part because of that.
Exactly.
Very few people really wanted to go through that. And the fighting, there was none of the pads that people see now. You had to just control it, and there wasn't always good control.
Right.
So as the pads came in with Jun Rhee, if I remember right.
Yes, he was the one that came up with that whole idea of wearing pads on your hands and feet.
And he sort of brought Taekwondo, the Korean style, to the United States, didn't he?
He was the first Korean that came to the United States, actually in Texas in 1956, and brought the Korean martial arts to the United States.
Teaching at Texas University, if I remember right.
He was down at the University of Texas, where his first black belt in America was Alan Steen, who was my instructor. So basically, my grandfather in Taekwondo was the grand poobah of Taekwondo.
So he brought in the pads. That helped a little bit. And then, but as time progressed here, and we ought to talk a little bit about that, more, as you say, more rules came in, because we wanted people to be able to come to classes and everybody leaves, nobody's hurt. Occasionally you're going to get a bruise or a bump, but everybody's able to come, have a good time, go home, learn something. And we especially wanted to make sure that kids were safe. So how have things changed now?
Well, as a matter of fact, I was telling my students just last night in class, because I had several of the parents sitting over at the sidelines, and I was talking about how the fact that football is probably more dangerous than Taekwondo, amazingly enough, because again, we have the rules and we have the pads. Right now, we're not able to touch because of the coronavirus, but we're going to get back into that hopefully pretty soon. But it really is a safe activity for not only kids, but I think people of all ages, because of the way we structure classes these days.
So if you're taking classes now, and I'm going to make the case, there are good schools and classes out there, and there are some that are not as good. And
I would agree with that.
Talk a little bit about what you would be expected to learn if you're going to spend, because I used to say it took about 4 years for the average person to become a black belt. I think it's what you would say 3.5 to 4 years, something like that,
yeah.
if they're training regularly and so forth, don't have any major obstacles to overcome, got to lose a lot of weight or something of that nature. So what are they going to learn in that time frame?
Well, we always start people off with a little bit of physical fitness to make sure that they get into shape and they start stretching. The flexibility is very important. And some of the basics of self-defense. I find that most people want to take martial arts because of the self-defense aspect. I mean, sometimes they want to take it because they want to compete in a tournament because they saw something on TV or in the movies. But by and large, people just want to get in shape, learn a little self-defense, maybe a little bit of self-confidence, especially for kids. Again, for example, last night in class, I passed a couple little kids to higher belts. And these were like 7 and 8 year olds that actually had, one kid has ADHD. And so his mom was just really thrilled at the end of class, because I was complimenting on him on how he paid attention in class. And she says, well, he never does that in his regular classroom. And so I even made the point of telling him, now, just like you're paying attention to me in karate, you have to pay attention to your regular school teacher as well. So I think it's a great activity for kids to develop that kind of self-confidence and focus that they need.
So they're going to learn to do kicking, punching, and that type of thing.
Right.
We have what we call kata, or forms. Now, talk a little bit about that.
Well, kata is the artistic part, if you will, of martial arts, where you do your moves in solo, but you still have to memorize the sequences, and you have to have proper technique. And so if you do it that way, it's almost like a karate dance. I've had people refer to it like that. And so it's a number of moves that get increasingly complicated as you come up through the ranks. So the first one might only have 3 or 4 moves. By the time you get to black belt or high black belt level, you got a routine that's got 100 different moves in it. And so again, you've got to memorize it, do it in sequence, do it correctly. And so it's really, really good for your mental focus and your physical and discipline.
And then you have self-defense, and then defense against sometimes weapons after you get a little a stick or a knife or things of that nature. And we have what we call one-steps, a quick definition of one-steps.
One-steps is where the attacker will take one step towards you with a punch, for example, and you have to block and counter. And I always tell people it's better to not get hit than to hit somebody else. And so the first rule is to block. In fact, we have an ABC, which is avoid, block, and close. So avoid is like step away. Don't let someone come after you. Block is keep him from hitting you. And then finally, you can close and counter. But you want to work through those processes. So I always tell people, don't go out and hit somebody first.
Always, what you're trying to do is create muscle memory here so that you just respond with things. My guest for this hour, Dr. Keith Yates. We're talking Christianity and martial arts. We'll be back in just a minute.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back to Point of View. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And in studio with me, Dr. Keith Yates. And we're talking about his book, Martial Arts and Christianity, which is available at Amazon. You can go online, and we've got a link to that at pointofview.net. You can also find out more information about Keith Yates there and get in contact with him. If you have questions about martial arts, you may want to try to reach out to him, because not many people know this topic as well as he does. Keith, when you and I started back in the 60s, there was almost no schools. And anything that you saw was generally sort of Chinese related or Japanese related, because it was relating to California, where a number of Asians moved and started teaching. But at least in Texas, there was not much of anything.
No.
So there were fanciful stories going on. I had people ask me, to get a black belt, do you have to go into a room with another person? Whoever comes out alive gets the black belt? No, that is not the case. But a lot of that has been sort of, we've gotten past that because so many people take it now. Do you have an idea how many people take it and what's the most popular form?
Well, there are millions of people, I would even say, in the United States that are either taking or have taken martial arts. Lots of kids do it. Again, before the virus came around and closed some of the schools, I would say probably 75% of the students in martial arts were actually kids. I have done a lot of articles from martial arts magazines where I interview school owners, and almost all of them have the majority of children. I mean, it's kind of ironic when you look back at the history of the martial arts, because martial means military. And so these were fighting combat arts. And nowadays, most of the people that do combat arts, are 10 years old.
That's right. But it's interesting because, and without naming names, I'm going to say the quality isn't the same across the line of schools. There are some, you're old school, I'm old school. I've stopped by a few schools at times, and I look at this and I see 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds coming out who just got a black belt, and they haven't even broken a sweat.
Exactly.
And you don't even really let somebody go up for a black belt until I think they're 12 years old, right?
Yeah, I've actually lowered my instructor had the limit of 17 to be a black belt, and I've actually lowered it down to 12 over the years, because I have students who have started with me at 5, and so by the time they've trained for 7 years, they're actually really skilled. One of the other things that I require for black belts is they have to be good students in schools on the A or B honor roll, which kind of goes back to our whole idea of focus. And also they have to show leadership qualities. If a 12-year-old can show a leadership quality, and I have them actually get up in front of the other kids and teach class and take over. So I think we're training future leaders in the martial arts if it's done correctly.
I was talking to a lady the other day, and she's a friend, and she mentioned she had gotten a black belt in Taekwondo, and I said, really? Okay, what kind of forms were you doing? I call them Paul-Gi forms, Paul-Gi, or were you doing the more traditional, the Chunji, Tangun, Tosan? And she said, kata forms, what do you mean? And I said, well, the forms that you have to do to go through and sort of the dance we were talking about a minute ago. She said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, you have a black belt and you don't know what kata or forms are? And she said, no, can you tell me what that is? And I kept thinking, there must be some word she's thinking about this that I haven't, but I got the impression she has a black belt. She had no idea what that was. Now, this is interesting because you are the author of the sort of the definitive book on at least the old school Taekwondo forms. You have that, and that's still in print, I think. You did a new edition here recently.
It is, yeah. That's available on Amazon, too, as a matter of fact.
And I bring this up because there are different qualities out there. Some schools will let people get a degree, get a black belt or something, and they wouldn't be able to go to another school and actually be able to defend that black belt. So talk a little about the difference in quality here.
Well, unfortunately, there's no overall organization for martial arts, whether it's Taekwondo or karate or Kung Fu. Each group kind of sets their own standards. So what you get is some people that after 2 years and you pay enough money to the instructor, you're a black belt. And then you go to other schools, and it's 10 years of arduous training, and you have to be really extremely skilled and knowledgeable to get a black belt. So there are no overall standards. So again, I would encourage somebody that is interested in taking the martial arts to go and to watch a class, talk to the instructors, talk to the other parents and students, because you can't just look it up on the internet and decide who's going to be the best instructor for you or your child.
But I think maybe a sort of a guide, if it looks too easy, it probably
Right.
not a good school to go to.
Exactly.
Now, talk a little bit about, because you did your master's on the issue of ki. Ki is a martial arts term,
Right.
But it gets into the broader thing of the philosophy of some of the Asian nations that were where these forms originated and so forth. Talk a bit about what ki is, and then let's talk about some of the other aspects of the spiritual side of some of the martial arts.
Okay. Well, my master's thesis was called The Demystification of Ki. Ki is a Japanese term. The Chinese pronunciation is chi. And so some people know what chi is because of maybe an acupuncturist that will talk about the chi flow throughout your body. This kind of goes back to the whole idea of a pantheistic philosophy of life, where there's an energy flow throughout the universe. The best way I can describe it to people who don't know anything about Asian religions is think of Star Wars, where Yoda is telling Luke to become one with the Force.
Right. And that force is something that's supposed to be sort of flowing through you. And they have in Aikido tends to sort of rely on ki a little more, because I've read books from Aikido professors and teachers who talk about the unbendable arm. I mean,
Right.
you have this ki that's supposed to be flowing through you, and if it's flowing through you properly, somebody won't be able to bend your arm.
As a matter of fact, I interviewed a Aikido expert for my thesis, and he was talking about the unbendable arm, and he was a believer. He was a Christian, and he said it's just a matter of physics. If you hold your arm a certain way and you turn it, you can kind of lock the triceps, so it becomes very difficult for somebody to bend your arm. And it's not a matter of harnessing the flow of the universe so that somebody can't push you over. Aikido literally means the way of harmonizing with energy, and it was started by a guy, Moriya Yoshiba, who was a devout pantheistic adherent, and so every time he did something, he would attribute it to ki as opposed to a physical technique. And I worked out with a lot of people over the years who are believers, and they can throw somebody, they can not have somebody bend their arm, they can break a stack of concrete, and it's not a matter of becoming one with the universe. It's because you know how to physically harness the energy of your body, not the universe.
You know, and athletes know this. Occasionally they have, I mean, if they are focused and they're dedicated, they've trained a lot, and then they have their, for lack of a better term, their mind right. You know, when I used to go in to play a football game, the coach said, we want you sitting around and just contemplating the game, thinking about the game. There's nothing spiritual about this. They want us focused on the game so that we're not thinking about everything else that comes into our mind. But that probably, there's an element of that, but that's really just a physical / mental thing as opposed to a philosophical / religious issue. Is that a fair statement?
I would agree with that. At the same time, I don't want to minimize the dangers, perhaps, of training with an instructor who has this pantheistic worldview, and so that you do this meditation and become, again, one with the universe, and you start to tap into what you think are spiritual or mystical forces in order to do your techniques. There aren't very many people, very many instructors around that subscribe to that, but still, you got to go back and you got to talk to somebody. And I'll even say that I've seen some demonstrations where somebody gets thrown, where the guy just basically points at him and the guy falls over, and you go, okay, this is either fake or it's demonic, because there's no way you can point at somebody and have them fall down.
And I've had people who've seen that on YouTube or something of that nature, and they are convinced that type of thing goes on. And I would ask them, how long have you been training in martial arts? Well, I've never done that. Well, I've been in there for over 50 years, and I've never seen anybody actually be able to do that. Then I've been around, as you have, some of the best practitioners in the world.
Right.
So we just don't buy some of that. All right, we want to talk about some of the concerns. Does martial arts promote violence? If I'm a Christian and I really should be trying to avoid violence if necessary, does martial arts sort of take me to that violent area?
I would argue that knowing how to defend yourself and having that self-confidence is a way to avoid having to use violence.
Could the martial arts lead me to embracing Asian or Oriental philosophy or religion?
There's obviously a danger of that. There's also obviously a danger of becoming more macho when you get out there, especially if your motivation for taking the martial arts is to beat up that guy down the block that's been bothering you, then certainly it can foster that. So it kind of goes back to having an instructor who's going to be able to minimize that in his or her teaching, I would say.
My guest for this hour, Dr. Keith Yates. We're talking about Christianity and martial arts. You can find out more about him by going to pointofview.net. Stay with us. We'll be back for our last segment with Dr. Yates.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. In with me in studio, Dr. Keith Yates, and we're talking about Christianity and martial arts. You can find out more about that with his book, Martial Arts and Christianity, which you can find a link to Amazon on the Point of View website. So, Keith, tell me, you have, because of your long engagement both in martial arts and Christianity, people have raised a number of issues. That's driven you to the Bible to try to find some responses to some of those so that
Right.
we can respond with Scripture on these. So run through some of those concerns that people have and the Scriptures you think address those issues.
Well, you know, some people wonder if the martial arts aren't too violent for Christians. And certainly I think you get that impression if you watch Steven Seagal, or even Chuck Norris, who actually is a Christian, but you watch his old TV show and he's kicking people left and right. And they say, well, I don't want to get involved in something that's all about violence. And I would argue that modern martial arts are not all about violence, but that still doesn't address the question of should Christians be concerned about that. Obviously, you can go back to the Old Testament, and there are a lot of godly men who were soldiers in the Old Testament. But then you come back to the New Testament, and Christ even talked to, like, the Roman centurion.
Yes.
When he came to him, Christ didn't say, well, in order to follow me, you have to give up your soldiering. No, he didn't say that. So obviously being a soldier was not against Jesus's views. The other thing that people often bring up is, well, didn't Christ talk about turning the other cheek? No less than C.S. Lewis said, well, that is talking about somebody that has offended you, and so you don't seek retaliation, not that you literally turn the other cheek if someone's trying to beat you up and rob you. And obviously also, like, you look in Ephesians 6 and the examples of the armor of God and the helmet of salvation and the shield of faith, these are all military examples. So if at least warriorism was against Scripture, they wouldn't be using those kinds of examples. And one of the verses that I really like is Psalms 144:1, where it says, "Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle." Again, that's an Old Testament verse, but it kind of harkens back to the idea that we have to be physically prepared to defend ourselves, whether it's our country, whether it's Israel or even the United States, or defend yourself and your family. So I think a Christian can easily make the argument that self-protection is not against Scripture.
So I've heard people make the distinction between, well, I will defend my family, but if somebody is attacking me for my faith,
right,
then I may not defend myself because I need to go. I need to be able to stand for my faith without responding violently. Is there a distinction there?
Well, I think the Scripture obviously tells us to stand up for our faith. I guess if taking an extreme example of somebody in another country, and if you're going to be martyred for your faith, yes, then you would stand up and allow yourself to be martyred, like many Christian martyrs have done over the centuries. But I'm talking about physical self-defense. Remember when Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane told his disciples to go and buy a sword for self-protection. I mean, that's an extreme example, but here's Jesus telling his followers that they need to be able to protect themselves.
If people are interested in the Gospel Martial Arts Union, how do they find out about that?
Well, we have a website, gmau.org, O-R-G, where you can go and learn about the organization. One of the cool things about the organization is we have martial arts programs that are set up in churches where they'll actually use it as an evangelistic outreach, because nothing draws a bunch of high schoolers and middle schoolers that say, hey, they're going to have a karate demonstration down in the church. They're going to break a bunch of boards and flip people over their shoulders, and all the kids want to go see that. And then we can actually present the gospel.
And talk about Kickstart a little bit, because you were on the board of Kickstart. That's Chuck Norris's organization. How is that still going? What is their goal?
Well, Kickstart for Kids has been around for years and years, and that was something that Chuck started. Again, he's a devoted believer, and they actually go into public schools, ironically enough, and teach martial arts to what they call at-risk kids. Mm-hmm. And even though Chuck is a Christian and most of the instructors are Christians, it's not an overtly Christian witness when they go into middle schools, because you can't do that in a public school. But they teach the principles of the martial arts, and as the kids learn from the coaches and from the instructors, and they're influenced by the Christian beliefs of the instructor. So it's a great program. We've got kids that were really at danger of going off into gang activity and becoming drug users and dealers, and now they've earned college scholarships, and some of them even come back to the Kickstart program and they're instructors in the program.
You know, that's one of the things I've learned about this over the years is that the kids who enter into martial arts and stay there, they just become good kids.
Right.
I mean, they just become good kids. They're usually respectful. They're eager to participate, follow instructions, and so forth. And it's interesting to see how it affects them as they grow up when they start young.
Right. And again, I think it kind of goes back to the idea that a lot of kids nowadays need some kind of focus, and especially the at-risk kids that we're talking about in the Kickstart program, need somebody to come in and show the kids that they really love them, and show a little bit of leadership qualities there. And the kids coming through, whether you're an at-risk kid or a Highland Park kid from the rich side of town, martial arts can really be beneficial.
And part of the purpose there isn't it we're going to teach you how to defend yourself, but the goal is for you to be so self-confident that you can walk away from a fight,
right,
or that you never have to defend yourself. And the notion is if you're strong enough to be able, there was a movie one time with a young gunfighter, I think he was Fabian or something of that nature, and somebody says, that's that person, he doesn't act like that at all. He said, he's so good, he doesn't have to prove himself to anybody.
Right. Well, partly because of my physical stature, I'm not a big guy, but I remember years ago, I was going to go give a karate demonstration, and I got out of my car and walked up to the building, and I said, I'm here for the karate demonstration. And they said, great, when does the black belt get here? And I said, well, that's me. And I guess that's a compliment that I'm so unassuming that people wouldn't go, well, that must be that tough guy.
Take just a minute to talk about some of the books that you've written, because you've written a number. We're talking today about martial arts and Christianity, but you've also written the definitive book on the old-style Taekwondo forms.
Right.
But you've got some others out there about that go through karate and Taekwondo.
Well, probably the most popular book I've got is The Complete Guide to American Karate and Taekwondo. And there I delve into history and philosophy and techniques, and have interviews with some of the well-known martial artists over the years and so forth. So that's a great book. Again, because I've written a lot of magazine articles, I've been able to meet a lot of people that I may not have been able to do otherwise. And there are a lot of great people in the martial arts. I mean, there's some bad apples as well as in any sport or activity, but by and large, martial arts are a great group of people.
Well, my guest for this hour has been Dr. Keith Yates. Had a 55-year career in martial arts, 40-year career at Dallas Theological Seminary in the art department. I guess because you managed. What was the name of the magazine there?
Well, Kindred Spirit.
Kindred Spirits, right.
Yeah, and we changed it over recently to DTS Magazine. And it's free, by the way. If somebody wants to go onto the dts.edu website, you can subscribe to the magazine.
So a long career in martial arts and in Christianity at the Dallas Theological Seminary. So thank you so much for joining us. If you want to find out more about him, you can go to pointofview.net, and you'll be able to find a little bio on him. We'll have a link to martial arts and Christianity, so you'll be able to get more information about that. And Keith, just thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate all your efforts with the kids.
Well, again, it's a real privilege. It's a privilege not only to be on this program, it's a privilege to have been able to work with kids. I work through the YMCA and have done that for decades and decades. So martial arts has really become a part of my life.
Oh, it's absolutely a part of your life. Well, thank you so much. When we come back, we're changing gears. We're going to go to Dr. Robert Popovian of Pfizer to talk a little bit about the new vaccine they have out, but also about prescription drug issues. And then after that, Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin and his study that his committee released on Burisma. So this is Point of View. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yeah, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point
And welcome
of View.
to Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in today for Kirby Anderson, and we've got an exciting hour for you right now. We're going to turn to the issue of pharmaceuticals and vaccines. We're going to touch on that in this first half hour with Dr. Robert Popovian of Pfizer, and then for the second half hour, we're going to Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin to talk about his report that came out in September on Hunter Biden and Burisma. There's a lot of interesting things in that report, so you'll want to stay for that. And then for the next hour, we're going to change directions again, and we're going to go to Daniel Allott. He is an opinion editor at The Hill, and he just released a book, On the Road in Trump's America, where he spent 3 years going around interviewing people in I think 9 or 10 different counties to find out what they thought about Donald Trump, the country, where the country's going, and so forth. This was published a few months before the election, so it'll be interesting to get his thoughts on that. So right now we're going to turn to the issue of pharmaceuticals and vaccines with Dr. Robert Popovian. Dr. Popovian, are you with me?
Yes, I am. Hi, Dr. Matthews. Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. Dr. Popovian, we've known each other for a good while. He is Vice President of U.S. Government Relations for Pfizer. He's been in this for 2 decades. He's got a degree in pharmacy and a master's of science in pharmacy, and has specializes in both pharmacy, pharmaceutical issues, healthcare economics, and healthcare policy. He has been published in a number of places: The Hill, the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, Pink Sheet, Managed Healthcare, and he used to, I think he still does, I see it fairly frequently, a column for Morning Consult. That's a place that aggregates a whole lot of healthcare issues, and they allow him to write an opinion piece, usually covering on pharmaceuticals there. As I mentioned, he completed his doctorate in pharmacy and Master of Science in Pharmaceutical Economics and Policy at the University of Southern California, and I think he's in California right now. But, Doctor, just thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
I'm happy to, anytime.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida is proposing an importation program. He's bumping into some obstacles as other states that have done importation. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about the news that came out just a couple of days ago. Pfizer's vaccine, apparently in the early trials here, had, I think, about a 90% success rate. That sounded really good. With vaccines, they want to achieve better than 50%. 90% is really good. Tell us a little bit about what the vaccine is and what your expectations are right now.
Sure. The vaccine has been in development for probably less than a year, and it's a collaboration between Pfizer and BioNTech, which is I believe, a German company. And the development process is based on an mRNA technology, which is a novel technology for developing vaccines. It's targeting the COVID-19 virus. It's also something that has never been, we're the first one in the market, but there's subsequent companies that are also working in this vaccine. So we're very excited. It was great news on Monday. It's great news for Pfizer, but more importantly, it's great news for everyone in the United States globally, that hopefully we will be a solution to the pandemic that we've been facing for the last few months.
Now, I want our listeners to know, because you mentioned that I think you started this, Pfizer started this at the beginning of the year, how unusual it is, I think virtually unprecedented, to be able to take a drug like this from what I call inception to ingestion in less than a year, maybe about a year by the time they get the first things out. Because you and I have talked about this in the past, it generally takes 10, 12 years for a drug to go from the very initial phases to the time it gets through all the various trials and gets FDA approval. Being able to do this in about a year is phenomenal, if not unprecedented.
Absolutely. It's a testimonial to both the science, the folks that work in the laboratories and do the researchers, but also it's a testimonial to have partnerships with the Food and Drug Administration, as well as the administration, who has cut a lot of red tape. But, there's some unique circumstances that industry has invested in heavily in this case compared to times past. So I'll give you one example that is in this time is different. Generally speaking, pharmaceutical companies wait until well after the submission of to the Food and Drug Administration, and wait until approval by the Food and Drug Administration to really get into manufacturing a medicine. In this case, Pfizer made the decision, and other companies have followed suit, to start the manufacturing process, what we call it, at risk, not knowing how the trial was going to turn out, or whether or not we were going to get the authorization from the Food and Drug Administration. And this is a very unique circumstance that cuts through the time, significantly reduces the time between when you start the trials and the research and by the time it gets to the patient.
Good. Well, let's turn to the issue of importation. That is where a state or a city allows individuals or perhaps a company to import drugs from prescription drugs from other countries into the U.S. without sort of bypassing the FDA process. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida has been pushing this with the support of President Trump, but the news came out last week that he had been looking for a company to sort of manage this importation scheme that he wants to do to import drugs into Florida for Floridians. He put $30 million, I believe, on the table for a company if they were willing to do that, and no company picked him up on this. Nobody took him up on it.
Right, and I think that that was a surprise, because a surprise and not a surprise, because remember, the importation can only happen from Canada according to the regulations that have been finalized by the administration. And the Canadian government itself is very concerned about whether or not the importation of medicines to a country like United States or states like Florida will reduce or impact the inventory of medicines in Canada. And they've been a little bit leery of endorsing it, and you can see from that no company was willing to sign up to be the sort of like the wholesaler that worked with the state of Florida to do this importation of these medicines.
My guest for this segment is Dr. Robert Popovian of Pfizer. He has a long career in working with pharmaceuticals. He has a PhD in pharmacy. And we are talking about importation, and we're going to talk about price controls on prescription drugs. So if you want to find out more about Dr. Popovian, you can go to the Point of View website, pointofview.net. We have his bio there and information so that you can find out more about him. Because this issue of prescription drugs, Donald Trump wanted to make prescription drugs more affordable for Americans. I think they actually have, but not so much from his efforts, though he's been reducing some of the regulations. The FDA has been able to sort of jumpstart some of these. So we want to talk a little bit about that and how changes might come about under a new Biden administration with prescription drugs. So stay with us. We'll be back on Point of View in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The mainstream media nearly always think alike, and the best example of that came 2 weeks ago when Glenn Greenwald resigned from The Intercept. Now, I'm sure you probably haven't heard about this news outlet, so let me explain why this provides such a good example of media groupthink. Glenn Greenwald was one of the founders of The Intercept. He created it because he wanted to have a news outlet that was insulated from partisan pressures and corporate influence. He's probably best known for his criticism of the surveillance state established by President George W. Bush after 9/11. He was convinced that corporate power kept him and others from reporting important stories. That is why he created The Intercept, so that he would be free from corporate pressure. So why did he resign from the news outlet that he actually created? His fellow editors would not let him publish a column about the documented evidence of corruption with the Biden family. In essence, they were following suit with all the news media and social media that ignored the story or even blocked the dissemination of the story. Columnist Jack Crow concluded that the Intercept editors succumbed to groupthink and quickly fell into lockstep on the Biden corruption story because their bias and partisanship comes from what pervades so much of the media class, cultural affinity. What keeps these elitist journalists in line is rarely corporate influence. They all have the same worldview and the same perspective on politics. They concluded that the original story of Hunter Biden and the Biden family published in the New York Post had to be ignored because it might hurt the Biden campaign. That is why social media censored it. That is why the news media ignored it or labeled it as Russian disinformation. Sadly, even the editors of The Intercept gave in to groupthink. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and on the phone with me is Dr. Robert Popovian, who is Vice President of U.S. Government Relations with Pfizer. Pfizer just recently announced a couple of days ago that their vaccine for the coronavirus was about 90% effective, so that was very good news for the company and for the country. Dr. Popovian, we're talking about importation and the ability for people to be able to import prescription drugs, sort of bypassing the FDA process, but import them from Canada under the Florida rule. But some of the others have expanded that to others. But importation didn't originate with Florida. There were some other couple of states that tried to do this back in the 2000s, weren't there?
Yes, absolutely. There were several states that tried to do this in the 2000s. And it was met with somewhat of a dubious failure because a lot of those states then rolled back their programs because they found that there was not a market in there for them. A lot of the websites went unused. A lot of the programs went unused, and a lot of states then rolled back the programs and stopped them.
And the idea, of course, at the time was we've got people who are uninsured. They may need prescription drugs and they need access to that. It's too expensive for them if they don't have insurance to go to the pharmacy. Was the sense, and so we're going to let them have access to Canadian and sometimes drugs from other countries. But since the 2000s, I mean, we passed the Medicare Prescription Drug Act in 2003, so seniors on Medicare have access to prescription drugs through the prescription prescription drug benefit there. People on Medicaid have access to prescription drugs through Medicaid. And then, of course, in 2010, we passed the Affordable Care Act, which requires insurance to include a prescription drug benefit. So the vast majority of people actually have access to prescription drugs with a health insurance benefit now. So it's not clear to me what the point is now. I mean, you might have made the case 20 or 30 years ago that a lot of people didn't have access to it. Now the vast majority of Americans have a prescription drug benefit.
Exactly. And if you think about it, also 10 years ago or 12 years ago or 20 years ago, vast majority or a good percentage of the prescription drugs were brand name medicines. Mm-hmm. Now, 9 out of 10 prescribed drugs are generics. And in the United States, we have the most competitive generic marketplace of anywhere else in the world. So, in fact, the majority of the patients who take medicines are taking a generic medicine, and they are perfectly happy and paying probably one of the lowest prices globally for those drugs.
And some of the more expensive drugs that we have now coming out are the biologics, and the Florida proposal actually, I think, excludes the biologics because they take so much care. You have to handle them correctly. They have to be refrigerated in most cases, I believe. If you fail in somewhere along that line, you end up compromising the drug, and then somebody doesn't get what they thought they were getting.
That is correct. They require special handling, and they are not simple medicines that you can take orally. They require infusion a lot of times in your physician's offices or in the hospital settings. And I don't think any physician wants to infuse a medicine that has not come through the regular supply chain to a patient who is in need, because then they take on the responsibility of what happens to that patient.
Now, President Trump made an issue of trying to make sure that prescription drugs were going to be more affordable. I believe the prices have come down or at least moderated some over the past few years, in large part because I think of what Dr. Scott Gottlieb and some others at the FDA did to try to accelerate the times of getting these drugs, increase the competition, so the competition helps hold prices down. But the president has also proposed what he calls a most favored nation status, where he's trying to ensure that people get a certain price for drugs based upon what they're charging in Europe. Now, it looks like the president's proposal is not going to be around long because it looks like Joe Biden will be coming in to be the next president. But the issue of price controls on prescription drugs transcends. I mean, generally Democrats are much more supportive of the price controls, but there have been a number of Republicans as well. Talk a bit about the issue of price controls on prescription drugs, because my guess is when Joe Biden gets in, we're going to be hearing a lot more about that issue from the Democratic House.
That is true. I mean, price controls on drugs have been around, and it's one of those issues that has had some sort of acceptance from. It's a bipartisan issue. But the interesting thing is that when you ask the population, the patients, the consumers, whether or not they want price controls, the answers are very interesting, because about the majority of the patients would say they do. They, in fact, want price negotiation by the government. But subsequently, what they also want, they want price controls or government negotiation if and only if it reduces their out-of-pocket costs. So the patients want to benefit 100% from any of the negotiations. Number two is that they don't want anything to be done regarding innovation. They still want newer medicines to come into the market, and they don't want any kind of an impact on new innovations and drugs. And the third thing, which is most important, they don't want any less access than what they currently have. So they do want some type of a price control or price negotiation, but they only want it if it benefits them. They don't want any stoppage of innovation, and they only want it if it doesn't reduce access to the medicines. We know price controls historically that have been instituted in other countries do the opposite. Number one, patients are not the ones that benefit from the price negotiations or price controls directly in those countries. Number two, it does impact innovation. Majority of the medicines are now being developed and discovered in the United States. There's a reason for that. Number two is that access is definitely lacking regarding new medicines in foreign countries, and we've seen the implications. So what will happen if you institute similar policies in the United States? You will get fewer medicines being developed and discovered in the U.S. There will be less access for those medicines that are in the market for the patients. And it's not necessarily true that the patient is going to be the one that directly benefits from any of these policies.
You know, it's important because you mentioned the issue of the out-of-pocket cost, because when people say drugs are too expensive, in the vast majority of cases, what they mean is my copay is too high. It's more than I want to pay for it. And that has changed over the years. And I don't think people realize this, but with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, as health insurers have been looking for ways to try to keep the price of insurance down, because the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, really put upward pressure on health insurance prices. One of the ways they did this was they started creating various tiers in the prescription drug market, so that if it's a generic, it's one price. If it's a brand name, it's another. But if it's a certain tier, a certain type of brand name, it may be significantly more. And now you have, I think, 3, 4, maybe even 5 tiers. So in some cases, you as a patient may be looking not at a copay of $25 or $50 for a drug, but a percentage. You've got to pay 25 or 50%, 20 or 25% of the cost of that drug. And if it's an expensive drug, that's a big price, but that's the insurance as opposed to the prescription drug.
You're absolutely correct. And you and I have had this discussion. The coverage for medicines in the United States, the insurance coverage, is upside down. The insurance market for pharmaceuticals covers everything that is inexpensive and covers little or not meaningfully anything that is very expensive or branded.
It's an interesting point, because if you got a generic, it might just be free right now, even though the generic only costs $5 or $10. But if it costs several $1,000s, you've got to pay a big portion of it.
Exactly, and it's the antithesis of insurance. What insurance should be, right? Insurance should be about covering what is expensive and also random and not often, versus what we currently see in the drug marketplace. And in fact, you're correct. The majority of these more expensive medicines that are used by few patients, and that's another anomaly that we don't talk about common. These new medicines that are coming out, these biologics and these personalized and precision drug medicines that are coming out, are used by a very small number of patients, but those patients are the ones that are really taking it in the pocketbook, and they're being hurt because, as you mentioned, a lot of those drugs require coinsurance, which could be a percentage of the retail price and not necessarily even the negotiated price that's been done on their behalf by the insurance company or the pharmacy benefit manager, which is another problem that needs to be fixed in the drug market. Nowhere else in the insurance market a patient pays a retail price if it's a percentage. They always pay based on negotiated price, except for pharmaceuticals.
Well, Dr. Popovian, thank you for joining us. Congratulations on Pfizer having such a good, successful trial on that vaccine. We're looking forward to that being out and available fairly soon. But thank you for all your efforts there. When we come back, we're going to turn to Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin to talk about Hunter Biden and Burisma.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back to Point of View. Merrill Matthews sitting in today for Kirby Anderson. And we're going to change directions again as we turn to Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Senator Johnson is chair of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, and is, of course, a resident of Wisconsin. Ran for his office first time, I believe, in 2010, won that Senate seat, and has been in the Senate since then. Senator Johnson, are you with me?
Hello, Merrill. I am. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing very well, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. You with the Senate, you have the Senate has been engaged with this issue of Hunter Biden, and you and your committee with Senator Chuck Grassley and his committee produced a report here in September called Hunter Biden-Burisma and Corruption, the Impact on U.S. Government Policy and Related Concerns. It's a 87-page report. It's a very interesting report, and since you released this, we've gotten a good bit more information about what's going on with Tony Bobulinski. But tell me, why did you and Senator Grassley decide to release this report?
Well, first of all, it's important to point out that we never focused on the Bidens. They were never an objective or a target of our investigation. This, among many other investigations that I've been involved in, starting with the Hillary Clinton email scandal and just kind of morphing into the corruption of the FBI during the Crossfire Hurricane investigations, I ended up joining forces with Senator Grassley, who had written some oversight letters based on an article by Ken Vogel in Politico talking about operative, a contractor for the DNC, working with certain individuals in Ukraine, potentially interfering in the 2016 election. So he wrote that article, I think, came out in January 2017, and he was doing some oversight and was kind of on a low boil. But we joined forces on a number of our investigations. We thought it'd be a little more powerful if you had two committee chairmen and their staffs working together to try and uncover the truth. And what ended up happening is during the impeachment, it really became publicized that Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma, a glaring conflict of interest. And so it was really the Bidens that put themselves in the crosshairs, made themselves certainly the interest of our investigations. And we published a report based on what we found, because I thought the American people really did deserve to understand what they may be getting in a Biden administration, and what they'll be getting is a president that has connections, business connections, knowledge of a vast web of financial dealings with individuals that are associated with the Communist Chinese Party, the People's Liberation Army. Pretty troubling. The CEFC, which is an oil conglomerate, but they have other divisions, just almost a direct conduit to the Communist Chinese Party. So this is something that I thought the American people needed to see. It's something that the mainstream media ignored. They said that, well, we found nothing illegal. Well, Merrill, it's not my job to determine whether something's legal or illegal. That's Department of Justice. Our job is to gather information and oversight to inform public policy, but also to inform the public, and we've done that. Our report raises far more troubling questions than it answers. But again, it was a real shame that the mainstream media and social media completely ignored it.
The major committees have both a majority staff and a minority staff. So Republicans are in the majority in the Senate, so you have the majority staff there, and then you have a minority staff on those committees also. Did you get any input, help, insight, or anything from Democrats, or did they just completely try to stop this process?
Yeah, total obstruction. In fact, what they did, this is actually leadership of Democrats in the House and the Senate, literally prepared what they called an intelligence product, had it classified, leaked it to the media, accusing Senator Grassley and I of accepting and then disseminating Russian disinformation. Nothing could be further from the truth. The individual they said that we accepted information from, Andrei Derkach, I'd never even heard of. And in fact, the only Russian disinformation that's been inserted into our congressional record is what Senator Gary Peters, my ranking member, inserted into the record when he put a chart that Andrei Derkach had prepared, showing that we as polls had gotten this information. It's an outrage, quite honestly, that Democrats continue to use this playbook Russian disinformation. I call it the Russian disinformation canard. The only Russian disinformation we have, literally, in these investigations is what was introduced in the Steele dossier, which the FBI was fully aware of, and yet they continue with their investigation, special counsel, and impeachment. But let's face it, any Russian interference into our election process or into our politics pales in comparison to how Democrats have used it and how the mainstream media has carried their water.
That's absolutely true. You know, as I was going through the report, I got my calculator because you have so many bullet points where you talk about either Hunter Biden or his various organizations getting money from the Russians, Chinese, other organizations, and I started trying to add all this stuff. I'm not even sure my calculator goes that high. There is so much money that you sort of document being transferred to him from various organizations, and I keep in some cases it's in the hundreds of thousands, in some cases it's in the millions, and I keep you sort of say for consulting services, or that's what they guide it for, and I'm trying to think why would Hunter Biden have that kind of expertise that he would be getting millions of dollars from a government for his services and consulting in government transparency and things of that nature? It's amazing.
Well, just 3 transactions: the $4.2 million that he and Devin Archer got from Burisma, the $3.5 million transferred from the widow of the former mayor of Moscow, and then the $5 million transferred from this Chinese company CEFC into his businesses. That's about $13 million over a couple-year time period. And you know, Merrill, the answer is obvious. It wasn't because he brought any skills to the table or provided any real services. He had the right name. And people were trying to buy influence with the Bidens, Joe Biden. Now, of course, what we know from Tony Bobulinski is contrary to Vice President Biden's repeated lie that he had never talked to Hunter Biden about these oversized business deals. Our report proves that he'd talked to Amos Hochstein, was the only government employee, a special envoy to Ukraine, that actually talked directly to the vice president about the problem with this conflict of interest. Then the vice president talked to Hunter to suggest and arrange a meeting with Amos Hochstein to talk about it. So there's lie number one. But we also found out, he's on the in China. He actually shook hands with Jonathan Lee, which is one of eventual business partner for Hunter Biden, and now we know that he met with Tony Bobulinski at least, I think, twice through that whistleblower account. So the vice president has just been lying through his teeth about this, and yet the American public, unfortunately, more than 70 million Americans voted for this individual who has this type of compromised connections, and that's important to point out. Tony Bobulinski, I thought, uttered 3 words in his press conference, or with his interview with Tucker Carlson. He said, plausible deniability. So they knew what they were doing. They just wanted plausible deniability. They tried to hide it, and then compromised. And it's important for people to understand, if somebody goes to work for a Biden administration, if they have these kind of connections, there is no way they could get a security clearance, and yet it looks like possibly, I'll wait to see what all these challenges might be, because I think there's plenty of signs of irregularities in the voting. But if Vice President Biden becomes President Biden, other than the fact that the American people give him the security clearance, he wouldn't be able to get one in his own administration.
I can't tell you how many times over the years in listening to a talk radio or something, a journalist who was covering or writing a book on an individual or an organization or something, and they would say, follow the money. And that was always sort of a key to, but the media were just absolutely uninterested in following the money here. And there's so much money involved.
There isn't. This was a really good report by John Solomon. He looked up the income tax returns, which Vice President Biden has disclosed $16 million of income since he left the vice president's office, but he reports only $3.2 million of assets. And John Solomon had an accountant look at that and said, well, at minimum, it ought to be about $9 million. So where'd the other $6 million go?
I saw a tweet from somebody not long ago saying, I'm not concerned about a person who made millions of dollars before entering office. I'm concerned about the person who made millions of dollars after entering office. My guest for this segment is Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. We're talking about his report from the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee on titled Hunter Biden, Burisma, and Corruption. That we have a link to that on the Point of View website. If you want to go find out more about the senator, we have his bio picture up there at Point of View, and we also have a link to the report that they've released. Very, very interesting report. Senator, stay with me. We'll be back in just a minute on Point of View.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back with my guest, Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. And we're talking about the report he released, his committee, 2 months ago, Hunter Biden, Burisma, and Corruption. He released that in conjunction with Senator Chuck Grassley. Senator Johnson, occasionally I'll hear members of Congress say something along the lines of, I'm talking to a friend on the other side of the aisle, and he or she says to me, I can't say this publicly, but this is really an issue. This is a real problem for us, but I can't say it because that's not the official position. Have you had any Democrats come up and say, I can't tell you, we're not naming names, but I can't say this publicly, but Hunter Biden is a real problem for us?
No. They just want to completely ignore this. Again, they attacked us. I mean, they falsely accused us of, accepting and then disseminating Russian disinformation. We had Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut publish an op-ed in the Washington Post with those false allegations. So there has been great resistance to what we are uncovering. And, of course, what ended up happening, though, is that our report somewhat broke a logjam of information. This is when, the day after that, we received a whistleblower complaint from the Delaware computer shop repair owner. And so in the end, he got kind of impatient because we had to try and verify that, and he went to Rudy Giuliani, and the New York Post broke that story. Then Tony Bobulinski, when he saw the fact that he had been shafted by the Bidens, that $5 million that should have gone into Sinohawk ended up going directly into the Bidens. I think that's certainly what ticked him off. Plus, with Adam Schiff claiming that he was providing Russian disinformation, I think Tony Bobulinski is a patriot, former military. That also kind of set him off. That might have been the straw that broke his back. So, I wish these whistleblowers would have come forward months ago. I wish we could have got our report out months ago. But, I can't tell you, Merrill, how difficult it was to get information out of the agencies, the departments that are supposedly under the control of President Trump. It just shows you how deep and pervasive the state is. It starts right below the level of political appointees and is pervasive throughout so many of these agencies. So I didn't used to use the term deep state, but based on my experience trying to obtain information and finding out how they just continue to hide the ball, how they slow walk all our requests, I don't know what else to call it. How long did it take you to produce the report? Well, we only called it an interim report because we still haven't got documents. So we were trying to obtain this information over, really since the impeachment is when we really kind of started, specifically requesting those documents. But I've literally been doing oversight into the corruption of the Obama administration since about March of 2015, involving Hillary Clinton's email scandal. We have never got all the information we require. We had to subpoena the FBI. We've given them, now we're basically on our third extension, which is an indefinite extension. We haven't got any of the information that the Intelligence Committee provided the Inspector General during his Crossfire Hurricane investigation. So this is a scandal in and of itself. I always talk about we have three scandals: the Biden family businesses, that corruption. Then we have the scandal that is the mainstream media and social media, their censorship, their bias. Then you have the scandal that is the deep state, the suppression of information, the lack of response to legitimate congressional oversight inquiries. I mean, we got a real problem in this country. President Trump came into office with the message of draining the swamp. Has he had much success with that? And I mean, he's the one who brought in the sort of the deep state, made that a popular term. He was going to drain the swamp. Any success with that? I would say, based on if these results hold, I would say the deep state won. I hate to say it. So it's one of among many of his accomplishments, I wanted to see him reelected, but I really wanted to see him reelected so that we could work together to expose and root out more members of the deep state. But they will remain entrenched, and they'll bring in reinforcements now. My general sense is he stirred the swamp. He didn't necessarily drain it just yet. Yeah, no, he definitely stirred it up, and they bit back. They bit back. Now, Tony Bobulinski, are you going to try to subpoena him or have him before the committee? Because I don't think that's happened yet, has it? No, he was going to come in when he first, right after that debate. He was going to come in that Friday and talk to our committee, the first informal interview. But the FBI requested, and then he went in and spent hours with the FBI, and we remain in contact with his attorney, and I'm not quite sure, what he's going to do. It's totally up to him. Listen, I'm happy for, real investigations by the Justice Department or by the FBI, but part of the problem with those is it just goes into a black hole. And I personally think that we do these investigations into wrongdoing in the political realm completely backwards. It should start with congressional investigations with access to all the information. If we see potential criminal activity, we can refer that to the Justice Department. If there's a conflict, then he can set up a special counsel. We did it completely backwards, and that's why we are here 4 years later, and we still don't know the full extent of the corruption of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and the special counsel and a whole lot more. It's really a travesty.
So that takes me to this question, which is if Republicans retain the Senate, and you've got to win the two seats in Georgia, or at least one of the seats in Georgia, I think, to be able to do that. But assuming the Republicans are able to retain control of the Senate, what are your next steps?
Well, again, I'm pretty tenacious. I want to uncover and reveal the truth. And so I will do that to the best of my ability. It's obviously going to be, we've had a hard enough time extracting information from the deep state with President Trump as president. What do you think is going to happen with a potential President Biden? Again, I'm making no assumptions here. I'm foursquare with the president, trying to take a look at every legal avenue and try and expose any kind of voter fraud as well. But if it's a Biden presidency, it's going to be just that much more difficult. Hopefully, some people in the mainstream press will continue to investigate this, because one thing I found out in these investigations, the press has access to sources that Congress never hears from.
And will you? I guess Fox News is willing to work with you on some. Are there some other press people that you feel like are actually? I mean, used to you think a member of the press could end up getting a Pulitzer Prize for exposing various kinds of scandals. Maybe they don't feel that that's the case if it's going to be of a Democrat, but you would expect a few members of the press willing to risk something to be able to expose that and perhaps make a name for themselves in exposing it.
No, there are some excellent investigative reporters, but it's a few of them. It's people like John Solomon and Catherine Herridge and Cheryl Atkinson and Peter Schweitzer and Molly Hemingway, and I hate to tick them off. There are some, and they're doing an excellent job, but there aren't enough. And the fact of the matter is, the mainstream media, they chose sides, and they are unbelievably biased. And as I said in the earlier segment there, their impact, their interference in our elections is far greater than anything any foreign power could possibly hope to achieve.
Very interesting comment. Well, Senator Johnson, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your efforts on this report, and we wish you all the best in going forward. And if you have a Republican Senate and you're able to retain the chairmanship of that committee, we hope you'll come on sometime in the near future and let us know how things are progressing.
I'd enjoy that. Stay healthy. Take care.
Thank you, sir. When we come back, we're going to look at Trump's America. We're going to be talking to Daniel Allott. He is a opinion editor at The Hill, and Daniel has written a book, came out just a few months ago, on the road in Trump's America, where he went around to a number of counties in America, talking to people, average people, about their thoughts about President Trump, President Obama, and the changes that the country is seeing. So stay with us. We'll be back with On the Road in America on Point of View in just a minute.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yeah, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in today for Kirby Anderson. And for our final segment today, we're going to be turning to Trump's America. Specifically, a new book out, On the Road in Trump's America, A Journey into the Heart of a Divided Nation. It looks like we're more divided than ever. On the phone with me is my guest, Daniel Allott. He is an opinion editor at The Hill, former deputy commentary editor at Washington Examiner, and Washington Fellow at the National Review Institute. He's been published in a number of areas, a number of publications, and he got a Master of Public Policy from the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University. Daniel, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you.
I'm fascinated by your book. I've got to ask you, when I first started looking at this, I thought, now this reminds me, back around 1967 or so, I think Charles Kuralt convinced his Walter Cronkite and the people there that he needed to go on the road and talk to Americans. So he did On the Road with Charles Kuralt. And I don't know if that you had that in mind, but it certainly sort of rings with that sentiment. Were you thinking about that when you came up with your title?
I wasn't. It was actually an homage to Jack Kerouac, but somebody the other day just told me about Charles Kuralt, and I'll have to look into the archives to dig out some of those old videos of what he was doing. But I heard he was doing some great work.
Well, what you did was similar to what he went out and he met with people, average Americans. He stayed off the highways because he wanted to get out to average people to talk to them about what they were feeling, what they were thinking, what was happening in their lives. And of course, in your book, you take 9 different states, but not just states, 9 different counties in those states, where you go out and you spend, I think, about 3 years talking to various individuals. You go back several times to these various places. You keep in touch with them over the time when you're not there, and you did what journalists actually used to do, which is go out and get a real sense of people and let them tell you their story, not you go out with a preconceived notion in mind and you write your story and then sort of use their quotes to try to fill in to justify what you were thinking. You go out and get their own stories. Why did you pick the counties that you did?
Well, I looked at some of the most important states from 2016, first of all, and within those states where the, real battlegrounds were. So, western rural Wisconsin, for instance, or southeast Michigan, Macomb County. And, it just turns out that a lot of those places were also the battlegrounds this year, Erie, Pennsylvania, and Florida, North Carolina. And so, but all of them kind of highlighted different set of issues, some of them immigration or manufacturing or, a bunch of different issues. Some of them, 6 of the 9, in fact, were Obama counties that swung to Trump. And so I wanted to capture that dynamic and try to follow a lot of that, interesting set of voters who voted for Barack Obama and then swung to Trump, why they did it and would they stick with him, which I predicted that they would, and it looks like most of them did. And in fact, I think, there are 200 counties approximately that voted for Obama twice and then swung to Trump. And I think 90% of them stuck with Trump. And that wasn't a surprise. And then 2 of the counties that I picked went the other way. They're historically Republican, Salt Lake County, Utah, and Orange County, California, but in recent elections have trended more Democratic, and in this election they actually went a little bit bluer and voted for Biden.
You know, one of the things you did was you went to talk to farmers, and you don't get a lot of people talking to farmers these days to get a sense of what they were thinking. And of course, the farm community, the farming industry was heavily affected by Trump's tariffs. There was some thought, and the media sort of pressed this as well, that the tariffs were going to hurt farmers economically, and that might pull them away, sort of separate them from their support for Trump. But that didn't seem to be the case that you found.
No, and I think it also highlights a little bit of the media bias and them continuing to get some of the stories wrong. You know, Trump won 60 or 70% of farmers in 2016, which is a Democratic constituency historically. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people were baffled in the media about how this guy from New York with his New York values could win over farmers. And then during the trade war in 2018 and 19, because of the reciprocal tariffs placed on a lot of agricultural goods, a lot of farmers were really taking a hit in their prices. And a lot of the stories coming out of the upper Midwest, where I was spending a lot of time, was, okay, you know, people are upset with their prices and they're blaming Trump and they may not vote for him again in 2020. And I just didn't find that to be true. I talked to so many different farmers, including quite a few Democrats, who really appreciated, even though they weren't happy that their prices were going down, but they appreciated Trump's approach to China. And finally, we have a president who is taking on China for their unfair trade practices. And every president has told China, don't do this, don't do it. And finally, Trump actually followed through and engaged in this trade war. And they agreed with his approach to it. You can't get away with this anymore, and we're going to hold you accountable, China. And so that's what I heard. I remember even talking to a very, very progressive farmer, a soybean farmer and chicken farmer in rural Wisconsin, who he hated everything about Trump except for one thing, and that was his approach to trade and to China. And he said, on that issue, I actually agree with him. Good job. I wish a previous president had done it. And so if you look at the polling during the trade war, during 2017 and 18, Trump's approval rating among farmers actually went up during the trade war. But a lot of the headlines from some outlets were, oh, you know, these farmers are going to abandon Trump, but it just didn't happen. And I think we saw on Election Day that rural America again voted big time for Trump,
and in some cases apparently even embraced him more, even as the tariffs and so forth, the trade war was hurting them even worse.
Yeah, and you can't discount. It's not, people just don't vote on their own economic interests, right? So there are other issues, and when you have, you know, a lot of rural places are historically Democratic, but when the Democratic Party has really shifted quite hard in the last 10 to 12 years to the left on a lot of cultural issues, social issues like abortion and, you know, policing and, you know, conceptions of what it means to be a patriot and so forth. And so when you have a party that's really embraced that progressive agenda and a presidential candidate who did that, that drove a lot of people to Trump. So on a lot of the cultural and social issues, they come down along the lines of Trump and Pence. So it was an easy vote for a lot of people there.
My guest for this hour is Daniel Allott. He is an opinion editor at The Hill, was formerly with the Washington Examiner, and has been doing this for some time, been published in a number of places. I know C-SPAN also did an interview with you, so that's available online. If you want to find out more about him, you can go to pointofview.net. I think we also have a link to the book, which I'll hold up here for the camera for people to see. Just came out, I believe, in August, and even though it looks like President Trump has lost the election, it is a very timely book. So stay with us. We're going to be back with Daniel in just a minute to continue our discussions about Trump's America.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Many Americans probably never even heard of critical race theory until the Trump administration ordered the federal agencies to stop teaching programs based on it in the federal government. If you read articles about it, you might conclude that it is merely an anti-discrimination program, but the president went so far as to describe some of the government programs as toxic propaganda. Since there's so much confusion about critical race theory, I invited Dr. Doug Groteis on my radio program to talk about his recent article on America, Critical Theory, and Social Crisis. He begins his article and his discussion on radio by talking briefly about American ideals as a standard to evaluate critical race theory. He points out that critical theory has its roots in cultural Marxism and is also tied to identity politics. You are defined by your group or intersection of groups called intersectionality. You are either in power or out of power. If you're in power, you are automatically discredited. If you are underprivileged, you are immune from criticism. That means the claims of critical race theory are unfalsifiable. It becomes impervious to counter evidence and thus cannot be rationally defended. He goes on to explain that the underprivileged can make demands, but they need not make arguments since the whole system, including basic rationality, is rigged against them. I think this explains why we hear proponents of critical race theory making statements without appealing to evidence and why they reject anyone trying to present evidence that might dispute their dogmatic statements. He concludes by taking us back to black civil rights heroes who instead appealed to the highest ideals of America and called for necessary changes in society. That is the model we should use as we work to right wrongs in society and work for racial reconciliation. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and on the phone with me is Daniel Allott. He is the opinion editor at The Hill, and he's recently written a book, On the Road in Trump's America, where he goes into 9 different states, 9 different counties in those states, and talks to average Americans about politics, their lives, who they had been supporting and politically, who they're supporting now, and what that means for us, and lessons he's learned from that. Daniel, one of the things you do is you talk about the Obama-Trump voters, those people who voted for Obama, many cases twice, but then voted for Donald Trump when he came around. I think it was 16 different people that you followed over 2 or 3 years as you just kind of kept track with them and their progress as they voted for Trump, and then how they're thinking about change things. Why did you choose those? Those seem to be sort of very interesting people having flipped like that.
Yeah, and I think there are an estimated 6 to 9 million people who voted for Obama twice and then swung to Trump, and they're disproportionately located in some of the swing states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Florida. And I just organically met people who happened to be, to fit into that demographic. And so I would really try my hardest to talk to them and interview them over the 3 years. And I found that a lot of them, believed in Obama's campaign promises initially in 2008 when he promised to be sort of the post-partisan president to heal the racial divide. And a lot of them were upset and that they felt he didn't come through on those promises. And some of them even felt like they had been duped and by Obama, that he wasn't what he promised to be. And so they were very open to Donald Trump when he started running. And among the 16, 14 of them were committed to voting for Trump again. And I know there hasn't been any exit polling on this issue, but I think when the studies are done, we're going to find that the vast majority of those former Obama voters who went to Trump stuck with Trump, even though Biden was on the ticket, who is obviously Obama's vice president. And there are a couple of reasons. One is a lot of those voters felt like Trump came through and accomplished what he set out to do. And in fact, among all the people who, even those who didn't support Trump in 2016 but planned to in 2020, they all told me, look, I'm really surprised. He set out a very clear agenda and he accomplished much of it. And people aren't used to getting that from a politician. The cliche is a politician who, says one thing to get elected and then they do something completely different. But with Trump, he's the same guy he was when he ran, both in terms of his personality and his policy. He's very clear about what he wants to do. You may or may not like it, but I think people appreciate that a politician is honest in that regard. And so among the Obama-Trump voters who felt like they had been burned by Obama, who said, one thing and they felt did something else, they're like, okay, Trump actually came through on these things, and I really appreciate that. And the other thing among that group of voters I heard again is that just this feeling that the Democratic Party has shifted too far to the left. And I remember talking to a man in Howard County, Iowa, and Howard County is a very interesting place. It's in northeast Iowa, borders with Minnesota. It's the only county in America that voted for Barack Obama by more than 20 points in 2012, and then for Trump by more than 20 points. In 2016, it flipped 41 points, and it's a very rural place. I talked to a lot of Obama-Trump voters there, and one guy named Joe Walker I talked to in 2017, registered Democrat, twice voted for Obama, and then swung to Trump. And the way he explained it, I think, I think a lot of people agree with this. He said, look, where the Democrats were 20, 30 years ago, that's where I still am ideologically. They've kind of moved away from me, and I'm still standing here. Meanwhile, the Republicans are more in line now with how I feel. So the parties are always changing, of course. Joe Walker hasn't changed. He still believes in the same things and positions himself in the same way. But now the Democrats have just left him behind. And I think a lot of people in rural America feel that way.
1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to call and talk to Daniel Allott. 1-800-351-1212. We'll open up the phone lines, but his new book, On the Road in Trump's America. And Daniel, one of the things that that has been such an anomaly, I think a number of people sort of dismiss this. Donald Trump comes in as a billionaire, a multi-billionaire apparently, and yet was reaching out. He was trying to reach out to people in the Rust Belt states, to farmers. Most of the people, I can't remember anybody in your book that I thought would be considered wealthy. Most of them seem to be very, very middle income people, some even perhaps lower income people. And yet Donald Trump was able to reach out to this group in ways that Democrats who had been saying for years, we're for the working man, we're for the average American, and we want to make sure that they're supporting Democrats, they were abandoning the Democratic Party for someone who is a billionaire. And that's a bit of an anomaly, but it seemed to work.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it had to do with Trump's business background. A lot of people appreciated that approach to government. I remember talking to a lot of farmers, and the word I heard over and over again among farmers and others was that Trump was a doer. He didn't just talk like a typical politician. He talks too, but he also gets stuff done, and he does stuff. Again, he sets out a clear agenda, and he gets it done, just like you have to do it in a small business on a farm. I remember one farmer put it to me this way. He said, if the light goes off on the street, a typical politician would, talk about it for 6 weeks and then convene a panel and do a study. And maybe a year later, they actually change the light bulb. Well, on a farm, you got to change it and move on because you got 100 other things to do. And that's sort of the way Trump approaches things, according to this farmer and many others. He's a doer. And I think even, I would challenge people. I'd say, well, he failed a lot in his business life. He went bankrupt a few times, and people actually appreciated that he was laid low and then he got back up. and was able to succeed again. I remember talking to a few people who said that made me like him more because it showed that he's got that resiliency that you need if you're going to be president. He can bounce back, and they'd look at their own lives or their own careers and think, I needed to do that. And so he would inspire a lot of people by having done that.
There's another anomaly here, which is, and we found this out after the recent election, is that you were talking to blacks, Hispanics, a Native American, and I think even an Iranian in there, who were generally, many of whom were supporters of Trump. And then we find out after the election, and there was some indication that this would be the case, that Trump actually performed better among blacks, especially black males and Hispanics, than anybody had really anticipated, even though the polls were showing that there was growing support for him. How is it that so many of the what they now call people of color ended up being Trump supporters?
I think the media look at Trump's rhetoric as being disqualifying for anyone of color, Latinos, blacks, immigrants. So, okay, he's so beyond the pale, because of his rhetoric, that they can't even consider voting for him. But I didn't find that to be true at all. I was always surprised. Whenever I would, take for granted, I'm talking to a young Iraqi Muslim woman in Erie, Pennsylvania. I'm going into the interview sort of assuming, trying not to assume, but assuming perhaps that she's not 100% on board with Trump. But it turns out that she is a fan. And I was always surprised. I mean, it went the other way, too. Sometimes I'd be talking to a white older farmer in Wisconsin, and they tell me how much they dislike him. So just not having those preconceived ideas was helpful. But yeah, as far as minorities, look, if you look at Hispanics and how well Republicans did and Trump did in some areas in Texas and Florida among Hispanic voters, this really shouldn't be a surprise. And this is a possible path for the Republicans going forward, because Latinos tend to be quite conservative on social issues, on abortion, church going, also very enterprising and entrepreneurial. A lot of them have small businesses. And so, again, Trump's approach to fiscal policy and social issues resonated with them. And some of them, I met a man in Orange County, California, who would have been open to voting for Trump, but he couldn't get past some of the harsh rhetoric from Trump. But a lot of them don't mind that, because on policy, they agree with the Republican Party, especially under Trump.
1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to talk to Daniel Allott about his book, On the Road in Trump's America. If you want to find out more about Daniel or the book, we have that available for you on pointofview.net. You can go there and get some information, find out about his background, and I would encourage you to do that and to look at his book, because it's very interesting as he goes out and interviews just average Americans, and took not just one interview, but multiple interviews over 2 or 3 years, really giving him insight into these various people. 1-800-351-1212. Stay with us. We'll be back on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point
and
of View.
welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And on the phone with me, Daniel Allott, who is the just published the book On the Road in Trump's America. Daniel, you mentioned the you come up with several, you sort of highlight some key points, key factors, key findings in there. And one of them is this rural versus urban divide, which I think we're seeing even more of in the election from just a few weeks ago, from a week ago. And one of the things you point out in there is you have this, I guess you call it the Cracker Barrel versus Whole Foods districts, and how they vote. What is the Cracker Barrel versus the Whole Foods segment?
It's counties that contain a Cracker Barrel restaurant and voted overwhelmingly for Trump in 2016, and those that contain just a Whole Foods voted overwhelmingly for Hillary. And so that's just an inkling of the divide we see. And people talk about different divisions in our politics, the racial divisions and class, but I think the geographic divide is probably the deepest, and that was definitely so in 2016. I think it's gotten deeper in 2020. And really, if you do a lot of traveling from urban America to rural America, I mean, it's two completely different countries in a lot of ways. The things that people do, the music they listen to, the way people dress, the food that they eat, including Cracker Barrel versus Whole Foods, and increasingly the values that they have and the politicians and policy priorities that they vote for are different. And increasingly, urban areas that are maybe a bit more vibrant economically and younger and more racially diverse, places like Salt Lake County that I went to, and Orange County, California, Northern Virginia is another one, are becoming more democratic, and places that are rural, including a lot of places that have historically voted for Democrats, and even a lot of them voted for Obama, are the domain of Republicans now.
And it really wasn't that way in the past so much, was it? I mean, Iowa went twice for Barack Obama. Most of those Midwest states, many of those Midwest states went twice for Barack Obama. But it's changing, and Trump sort of highlighted the loss of manufacturing jobs, the offshoring of a number of our jobs that have devastated some of these towns, and you even talk about the increase in opioid addiction and other things that have sort of emerged in these areas because of just the lack of jobs and the lack of a sense of good future there.
Yeah, and I heard from a lot of people in rural areas, the word I kept hearing over and over again was that Trump listened to them. They felt that Trump was listening to and understood their plight. He seemed to understand that the work that they did was important, that America couldn't survive on just a combination of high-tech jobs and low-wage service jobs, that the middle, rural manufacturing, rural agriculture, farming was really important. And he seemed to be indicating to those people that their work was valued, and also that their values wouldn't be mocked. I think a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners, understand that Hollywood and the elites, the establishment, often mocks Christian values, more traditional values, and a lot of people feel looked down upon. And ironically, perhaps, Trump conveyed to people that in his administration, with Mike Pence at his side, that they wouldn't be mocked. Those values would be upheld as being, traditional American values that would be championed in his administration. People appreciated that. And you mentioned the manufacturing issue. One quick story in Robeson County, North Carolina, where it's maybe the most interesting place I visited. It's the most racially diverse rural county in America. It voted for Obama twice and then swung to Trump. And it's got, a plurality of residents and voters are of the Lumbee Native American tribe. And historically, they voted Democratic, but they increasingly every year they would vote more Republican. And part of that is the social issues. It's a very conservative area. And as the Democrats became more went left on those issues, they started to embrace Republicans. But also, they had lost 10,000 jobs due to NAFTA. And so when Trump came out in 2016 and said, look, this was a terrible deal, we're going to renegotiate this terrible deal, he was the only politician of either party preaching this idea that free trade isn't fair unless it goes both ways. And that resonated. I talked to so many people of the Lumbee tribe and others in Robeson County. Said, wow, it seems like clearly he's not from Washington because he's going his own way. And I think he's listening to us. And they had lost so many jobs, textile manufacturers. I think Converse had their big factory in Robeson County, and they'd been devastated by that loss. And they're the poorest county in North Carolina, a lot of violent crime, and a lot of people having a hard time. But he seemed to really listen to their plight, and that's why he won. And he won Robeson again by an even larger margin last Tuesday.
It's interesting because you mentioned how a number of the people that you talk to feel neglected. I think that was true in Wisconsin especially. And you've also mentioned the sense of denigrating certain people because you had Obama with these people with their guns and religion. You had Hillary Clinton and the deplorables. You really got a sense from some of the people who are on the liberal side that they are somewhat elitist and feel like the rest of us, if you didn't get your degree from Harvard or Yale, you just don't really have the knowledge to be able to talk to me or to understand, us elites, and you get the sense that they just look down on an awful lot of people.
Yeah, and people have had enough, and again, ironically, Trump was able to let people know, even through some of his campaigning and a lot of the events that he would hold, the rallies. A lot of them were in places that a lot of Democrats would never go in Middle America, and that really conveyed to them that he cared about them. And with the farming issue, he gave out a record amount of aid to farmers both during the trade war and during the coronavirus pandemic as they were being hit hard. And he would always tweet and say things like, we love our farmers. And that really did have an effect on people that said, okay, all right, we're paying the price here, but I can tell he cares about us.
1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to talk to Daniel Allott. The thing that sticks with me is that you mentioned that so many of these people did not change their mind. They voted for Trump in 2016. There have been a lot of things that happened between now and then, and it seems that most of them still were going to support Trump. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and I think on both ways. Those who didn't support him before still don't, and for the most part, and those who did in 2016 still do and did last Tuesday. And I think that was a big revelation for a lot of people in the media and a lot of the pollsters who felt that there would be a big shift. And to me, it gets to the issue of tribalism and how tribal we've become. And that was probably my most important finding, was just how few people had changed their minds about Trump. And I would often be able to predict how people would come down on virtually any issue related to politics, whether it's, the Supreme Court nominations or the coronavirus, just based on one question. I would ask them, how do you feel about President Trump? What are your feelings about Trump? Based on that answer, I could predict how people would come down on any other issue. It could be the NFL protesters, coronavirus, things that weren't, directly political perhaps. And it would all be based on that, because that's how tribal we've become. And it's you're pro-Trump or you're anti. You have to be in one group or the other. And that's why I think very few people have shifted. I also think, it's just because Trump was very clear about who he was and what he was presenting. As my British father would say, with Trump, it does what it says on the tin. So you know what you're getting. And it's true. I mean, he didn't change in office. A lot of people were saying, he's going to become more quote unquote presidential. He didn't, but he never promised that. He's the same guy. And you know exactly what he's bringing to the table on policy. He said, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And then he did X, Y, Z. And people appreciate that. Even those, I heard a few people who didn't agree with what he was doing kind of begrudgingly say, well, he's come through on the things that his supporters value. And so, he's probably going to do pretty well. But I think that's something going forward that politicians should take note of.
1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to talk to Daniel, we've got Barbara on the line in Georgia. We've got to take a break here, so we're going to come back to her in just a second. 1-800-351-1212, and you can go to pointofview.net if you want to find out more about Daniel's book, On the Road in Trump's America, just released a few months ago. It is one might think that if Trump has lost this election, it's less relevant. I think looking at it, it's even more relevant than ever. So stay with us. We'll be back on Point of View.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back for our final segment with Daniel Allott and his book, On the Road in Trump's America. So we're going to start out by going to Barbara in Georgia. Barbara, you're on the air.
Hello. I was calling because I'm Afro-American and retired military. And Trump really impressed me because even though the media is always saying he's a liar, he actually is a truth teller. You know, he doesn't say anything that he's not going to do. Whatever he puts out there, he makes every effort to finish. So, you know, we saw that he's a starter and a finisher. He loves people. You know, we like the fact that he cares that everyone gets the right thing no matter what they are, you know, and we really appreciated that.
Daniel, you ran into a lot of people like Barbara who say essentially the same thing Barbara said.
Yeah, and that's sort of the irony of the Trump presidency. You have a president who, according to some estimates, has made more misstatements and inaccurate statements than any other president in recent memory. But on the one thing that matters most, which is coming through on campaign promises, he's actually been very honest, and voters and citizens like Barbara, I think, really appreciate and aren't used to getting that from a politician.
It's very unusual. Anything else, Barbara?
Well, the other two, last three for me was he fights for America, and America really did come first with him. He stands for life. He doesn't discount the life in the room, and he defends religious freedom, no matter what your religion is. So, for people to call him a bigot and all that stuff, that's just lies. I think if he loses this election, it's because he did not put the media in line. You know what I'm saying? They needed to be put in line right away. And he let them have their news.
Thank you, Barbara. And now let's go to Lisa. Lisa, you're on the air.
Oh, yes. Hello, Daniel. I've loved everything you said. You are so right on. I actually live in rural Georgia. About the Cracker Barrel analogy with the Whole Foods, totally agree with you on that. Yes, Trump all the way. This is ridiculous. This, I'm a Christian. He stands up for religious freedoms. He's pro-life. I mean, everything about Trump is just so right on, and it's so unfortunate to see what's happened, to our country now, and this quandary. We have to get this election fixed because it's just a travesty what's happening. But I did have a question for you. I didn't hear your part of the research and stuff. So I actually grew up in Los Angeles. My parents were very conservative. California had and that had very conservative parts of it. Did you ever find out in your research if parental affiliation or political affiliation had any effect on their children in a positive way? And do you see a lot of trends with that? So, like, my parents were conservative. They taught me the principles of conservatism. Did you find that in your research at all?
That's interesting. Well, you actually... in Orange County, which is just south of L.A., it made me think of a man I met, Eddie Lopez, who I mentioned before. He's a Mexican-American and was sort of on the fence about Trump and ended up voting for Biden based on some of Trump's rhetoric on immigration and what he said about Mexicans. But he always lamented how his two sons, who were born in the U.S., were big Trump supporters. And there was always these, nightly battles at the dinner table over politics. And he said it was because, his sons had been born in America and didn't understand the immigrant struggle. But I find that too. There is a bit of a generational divide on a lot of these issues. That's about all I have to say on that.
Thank you, Lisa. And Daniel, the question that has arisen now is, we're assuming Trump, Joe Biden comes in, he's the president-elect, assuming he comes in, that's all done. Is the Republican Party changed for good because of Trump? Because he certainly pulled it in different directions than it had typically been in many areas. Do you think it's going to drift back to its sort of traditional roots, or do you think we have a new Republican Party now?
I don't think it can go back. It's a populist party. I think this election showed a pathway to being able to win over minority voters with this, and Trumpism, however you want to define it, it's America first on issues like trade and foreign policy and even immigration and social conservatism is a winner. And certainly what the Democrats are offering is not. Especially the more radical proposals. But I've talked to a lot of people, conservatives lately, who say, if we could just get a standard bearer, a leader who embraces Trumpism, the Trump mantle, but doesn't have some of the personality flaws that Trump brings, then we could really win. We could do really well. But I was always struck in traveling the country and talking to a lot of Trump voters. A lot of them, especially the former Obama voters who then swung to Trump, they're real independents. And they would say they wouldn't define themselves as Republicans. They would say, I'm a Trump supporter, I'm a Trump voter, but I'm going to vote for Trump, but after him, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I don't know if I'll go back. A lot of these people hadn't voted in a while. They'd say, maybe I won't vote, or maybe there's a Democrat, depending on where the party goes, who I could vote for. I don't know. So I think if Republicans, if they take those voters for granted that they're going to stay with the party post-Trump, I think they could be in trouble.
But it's interesting because Trump's personality is part of the whole package. It's the person who comes up, so say for instance, a Mike Pence who says, all right, I'm going to now run for president and I'm going to run on his policies, but he doesn't, and Mike Pence, I've known him for 25 years. He's a very, very nice guy, but he doesn't have that same kind of edge. And I just wonder if you can do the policies without the edge.
No, and I would agree, and I actually compare it to Obama. Now, when Obama won in 2008, Democrats felt like they were going to win for a generation.
Oh, yes, they did.
There were
yes,
books written, the permanent majority. And what happened? They lost at every level: the midterms, the lower levels, the governorships, state houses. They lost. The only other time they won was Obama's reelection, and then, of course, Hillary lost with basically the Obama platform. Okay, but she wasn't able to reassemble that coalition because she wasn't Obama. She didn't have that charisma. And in the same way, I think Trump has a charisma that even people on the left have to begrudgingly acknowledge that he can. I mean, he wouldn't be able to. He's the only guy in America who can draw 20, 30, 40,000 people to a stadium on a random night. And he's been able to do it for 5 years. And so you're right. If whoever takes up that mantle going forward of Trumpism, if they think they're going to be able to reassemble, the entire coalition. I think they could be wrong because he does have a charisma that is unique. And the only comparison I would make is with Barack Obama.
Yes. My guest for this hour has been Daniel Allott. He is an opinion editor at The Hill and published in a number of areas. His new book, On the Road in Trump's America, we have that information available at pointofview.net. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great and fascinating.
Thanks, Merrill. Really appreciate it.
So if you want to find out more about him, as I mentioned, go to pointofview.net and you'll be able to find out about the book. And it'll be interesting to see if Daniel comes up with a sequel now that his things have changed. So I want to thank Andrew and Steve for manning the controls behind us. And come back tomorrow. We'll be back with Point of View. Thank you for joining us.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.